Welcome to a discussion held in the context of the first ever NFT auctions in India by Princeps. Before we begin, a disclaimer: this is not a legal advice, it's an educational webinar only, not an investment advice from any of the panelists or from their companies. You must seek advice from licensed professionals in your geographic countries or jurisdictions. This webinar should not be considered towards sale of any crypto or NFT cryptocurrencies, and NFTs are highly speculative.
I will start with Suril. Thanks for joining firstly. I had met Suril at a webinar, at a seminar in Soho House. And I've also seen him at a chat with Arnab on TV, yes, where he was asked a question on surrogate marketing, which kind of he had a funny response to it. But anyway, so quickly, can you walk us through your crypto journey when you began? Because I know you're one of the early beginners in this space.
So let me begin. Like in 2006, I returned back from the US and I was pursuing my legal education in India. And around about 2008, I heard about SpaceX and was really excited about this whole new thing about privatization of space exploration. And I was researching a lot into it. And while I was doing that research, a colleague of mine came and told me in around about 2012 that I should look at Bitcoins. And I was like, what does a global cryptocurrency have to do with space exploration and things like that? And then he said, no, then have a look at this site called SETI. And SETI is Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It's a program that has been started by, it was started at the University of Berkeley in the latter part of the 90s. And I did follow it when I was in the US, and then I'd lost complete touch with it. And then that's when, and then when I revisited it, I was quite amazed to see that the idea of decentralization of computing power was already existing in our world, except that it had not been used to its optimal capacity. And then I read up on cryptocurrencies in 2012, and I was like, wow, this is fascinating, and for me, more than the tech, the whole idea that how cryptocurrencies came into existence, especially when how the Bitcoin white paper came literally 1 month after the greatest financial crisis of our times. And all of those issues really made it really exciting for me. And I started looking at it from a very different perspective. I realized that, the banking system was not functioning optimally, and it was not doing, there were a lot of issues with it, and the problem of the unbanked and all of that. And the Bitcoin white paper kind of didn't address it specifically, but the idea of creating a virtual currency was really exciting. And I deep dove into it, and I thought it would take about, a good 10 years before it actually becomes a reality, and before it hits the Indian environment and the Indian landscape. But then in 2013, I came across the first Bitcoin conference that was happening in Bangalore. And I was like, wow, this is fascinating, and it was not a cheap conference, it was like almost 10,000 rupees, and for something that's in such a nascent state, a conference where you're paying 10,000 rupees is quite significant. So I said, let's go for it. And it was a 2-day conference, and I went for it, and I was surprised that there were more than 200 people who had attended this conference. It included people all from, it included obviously the programmers and the developers and the early stage entrepreneurs. But along with that, there was presence of the RBI, of some officials from the RBI as well. And I was quite, I mean, and they broke it down into like the arithmetic behind cryptocurrencies and Bitcoins and things like that, which obviously I absolutely could not understand one word of, but what I really gathered was that this is going to become a very significant instrument, and it's going to be very significant for a country like India, which has probably the world's largest number of programmers and developers. And I went for the conference. And then I became good friends with the organizers, and and by then we had already done some rudimentary research on cryptocurrencies and bitcoins and blockchains. We were just kind of understanding that it's the whole idea of decentralization and things like that were very we were aware of it, and they came to us, and then we said that we would help you write some kind of representation to the government of India. This was in 2013 December, in the first week of December. And 2013 December 24th, RBI comes out with its first notification saying that people should be wary of cryptocurrencies, and and the industry panicked, and they approached us, and we were ready with an opinion by then. It was like, Bitcoins per se, according to our research, is not illegal in India. And we wanted to make that statement, but we realized that if we approach the government, and by then the enforcement directorate had already raided a couple of crypto exchange players, and some of them were in custody and were being questioned, especially under the money laundering provisions and things like that. And we were like, if we go approach the government, the government would set up a committee, and the committee would take about 6 months or to a year to come up with a decision. Until then, the exchanges and the entrepreneurs would be in a limbo or stuck. So we said, let's take the bull by the horn. And the founder of the firm, Ranjit Desai Associates, who happens to be my father, me and my colleagues had briefed him, and so we decided to hold a press conference on sometime in January of 2014. And at the press conference, we had all these entrepreneurs come and talk about, the whole Bitcoin mechanism and the technology behind it. And at the end of the conference, my father, he goes up on the podium and he makes a statement that, Bitcoins per se are not illegal according to our research as of now. And that became the headline news for almost every press at that point. And within a few days, the crypto exchanges were back up and running. So this was one of the first instances where we had actually, come forward and helped the industry, survive. Post that, there have been a lot of queries about cryptocurrencies that started coming towards us. At the moment, we are almost representing, we are representing more than 105 different crypto related matters, and it ranges from NFTs to exchanges to tokens, the works. And what we are observing is that there is a lot of excitement around it. There is a lot of enthusiasm. There is a lot of, obviously, along with that, there is a lot of hype also, which is happening. And then let me go back to my story and then sometime in 2016-17, during the ICO boom and stuff like that, there was a big Ponzi scheme which was played on the Bitcoin, on the blockchain. And as a result, another ban was put by the RBI, this time not on the exchanges, but it was a notification which the RBI made to the banks saying that, you should not be permitted to operate the accounts of the crypto exchanges and anyone dealing with crypto. So again, we were in a crisis-like situation, and then we decided that we would file a public interest litigation, and we went to the Supreme Court, and uh, we filed it in May of 2018, and which said that this is unconstitutional, and this is too extreme. And to our sheer delight, in March of 2020, right before the first COVID lockdown on around March 4th, the Supreme Court came out with a decision which clearly said that, that what the banks are doing is extreme, is not right, and it put out a judgment which said that the Reserve Bank should not be doing this, and the ban was lifted from the banks, and that again ushered in a whole new era of crypto. And since then, we saw, like at around March 4th, I think the price of crypto was in 2020 was somewhere around $7,000-8,000. And then by the end of the year, it had reached like some $50,000 or something, $25,000. And we saw this whole momentum and this extreme increase in people wanting to get into crypto, in whichever way they want was possible. So, and also keeping in mind that, during the lockdown, people had a lot of time on their hands. So many of them got into equity trading or into crypto trading. And that resulted in this whole boom. And for me, crypto became this very, I still don't understand how it became such a phenomenon. I understand the fact that, the network effect, the number of computer, the penetration of the smartphone ecosystem, the increase in the whole gaming and interest in all of that. And all of that brought about this whole new phenomenon. And Bitcoins, I mean, I've been a big fan of Bitcoins, but at the moment, I am a little bit disappointed with the way it's going, because today, the cost of Bitcoin transactions have gone up very significantly, and which actually defeats the purpose of the whole idea, the original purpose, which was peer-to-peer cash system. Right now, it's become more of a store of a value system. So, people are not easily able to transact and do business. I mean, just accept and send and receive Bitcoins as a form of payment. I mean, El Salvador has been working towards it, but it's still, there is this, I mean, what was designed to be a social leveler has become this whole new social, I mean, the ones who have access to wealth are still getting more access to it. And, but I do see that cryptocurrencies in general are here to stay. The genie is out of the bottle. And which cryptocurrency survives and thrives will be determined by the, it's like, I mean, every time people ask me about what makes Bitcoin so special compared to any other, centrally backed fiat or whatever you call it. And I feel that Bitcoin has the potential of becoming a very simplified and it can be as simple as imagine sending money as simply as you send an email, I'm waiting for that moment to come, which I do see coming, but which crypto will do that is a big question mark right now. And I mean, there is lots I can talk about my whole journey. It's been, I mean, I've been in it since 2012. And prior to that, like the whole idea of decentralization is itself very exciting, because I can see its applications not just in the financial system, but also in terms of, the political system. I mean, when you have decentralization of power, how elections can be conducted on the blockchain, or how commodities and how social welfare plans. In fact, I was recently reading up on how the Rohingya community in Burma has set up their own system for financial and social inclusion using the blockchain, and they're creating their own ecosystem. And so there is so much happening in this space that, I mean, if I have some questions, then I would be in a better position to talk about it.
I will ask you two specific questions, but before, I just want to ask you a question on the Howey test and security currency. But before I get to that, I just want to move over to Kent. And what I think what we'll do is like we'll go one by one and then come back, circle back. Sure. So can you walk us through, I mean, the fascinating story of Lightning and how you acquired it and the reason to mint an NFT on this? And also, most importantly, there's a gaming component on the minting as well. So if you could just walk us through some of those.
Thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure. Good evening to you all and good morning for my friends in the US. I've been an Indian contemporary art collector, I should say, since late 1990s. And then as I begin to collect, we started collecting more and more Hussains, into our collection accidentally. It's not that we went after a particularly Hussain as an artist, but it just so happened that the inventory was available was mostly of Hussain. So we were able to buy most of those at the time. And then I became very aggressive in collecting Indian contemporary art. I almost felt like I had this amazing opportunity to looking at the Indian art at the time at a much, much lower in terms of valuations, because I came from buying European art, whether it's a Dali or Chagall, like other paintings. So for me, when I looked at the works of Indian contemporary, they were amazing in terms of the talent and also in terms of the value that you were able to get. And I did not want to have a single piece unsold in most of the auctions at the time. So whether it's Christie's or Sotheby's in New York or London or in Hong Kong. So we were buying heavily. And at some point in 2002, I think it's early of 2002, I wanted to get the largest Hussain. Go ahead.
I just want to make a joke. Princeps was not there at that time. Otherwise, else you would have been probably acquiring from us. Anyway, go ahead.
So I just wanted to have the biggest painting Hussain in my collection. Because if I'm collecting Hussains, I just wanted to have the biggest work. And we reached out with great difficulty to Hussain directly, and we started looking at different works. And then finally he came back and said, I have this biggest painting. You would not be interested in that. And I said, no, that's exactly what I want. He said, no, you can't hang it in the house. I don't want to give it to you. I don't want to sell it to you because it's just too big. I'll give you Kerala series, which are big, 4 feet by 6 feet. I said, no, I want that particular largest painting that you got. And finally, we went back and forth. I don't want to take too much time here on that story because it's a fascinating story as I go deeper into that. We negotiated on the phone and I flew in to pick up the painting to Delhi. Hussain was not in Delhi, he was in Chennai. And when I called him up, he said, oh, I thought you were just kidding me when you said you'll be here tomorrow morning. I said, wait, stay there. I'm coming right back from Chennai. So he flew back from Chennai. And then I spent 3 days with him because he wanted to prep the work. He wants to clean it up before I can see it. And I said, no, I just want to come and see it. So we drove down to Nizamuddin. I think that's the area, something like that. Yeah. So in Delhi. And then this huge painting was sitting in his basement full of dust. And I did not know what to say at this point. I was bummed because I wasn't expecting the painting to be in that condition. So I called my wife up. I said, look, Marguerite, I work too hard for the money. I struggled to make my savings. I don't want to give it to this man. And she said, shut up, give the guy the certified check you have in your hand, come back with the painting. Otherwise, don't come back to New York. So I started talking again with Hussain, and finally, I ended up in picking up the work. And part of picking up the work is, for me to acquire all of the rights associated with the work. Every single right there you can consider conceivable was assigned to me by Hussain. So that's how I acquired the painting. So similar to what Suril was saying, I got exposed to BTC back in 2011 at South by Southwest conference in Austin, Texas. And somebody approached me and the lady wanted some lunch money and she was going to give me this Bitcoin. And I did not know what it was. And anyway, I gave her the money. She gave me this piece of papers in which she wrote all the hash for it. And I was fine with it. And like, I didn't really make a big fuss out of it. The lady wanted lunch money. It's fine, move on in life. And then as I started, I do a lot of meetups in New York because I'm part of the tech community in New York City. So I'm doing a lot of these meetups and this ICO craze comes in 2017 based on the ERC20. So starting 2018, I started consulting to a lot of these companies who wanted to mint ERC20 tokens. So we primarily, did on Solidity and build a ERC20 token platforms for them, and they pay us in fiat, and we give them the platform. We're done. So that went on 2018. Then it just got into my idea. Why can't I use the ERC Ethereum blockchain as my database? I took some of my actually a lot of my paintings, I pushed them into the blockchain, into the ERC20 back in 2018. Not knowing what I was doing, to be honest with you. I just wanted to use it as a database because Gallery Systems was charging me, I think, $3,000 per annum in the licensing fee to maintain my collection on the database. So that's the reason why I wanted to use the blockchain as my database, so I don't have to pay anyone extra money. So I can go and look up my hash at any time I want because the data is always going to be on the blockchain. So that's how my art started becoming a tokenized into the blockchain, but I had no intentions of selling those tokens ever. That was primarily for internal use. And coming, fast forward into 2020, during the pandemic, I'm looking at everybody's chatter. Everyone is going crazy with these NFTs. Then I slowly started buying into NFTs, came into 2021 last year. I starting to get active from February, March, April period. And then I started making fun of people because like, who would want to buy an ape? Who would want to buy a strawberry? Like, guys, are you nuts? So we had a very, very active Clubhouse community. I think I have like close to 2,400 followers on the Clubhouse community. And we maintain every week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. We are like 41 weeks straight without a stop. And finally, it occurred to me that I should create some kind of an NFT, something that I could use it as my Genesis project. I look at different works of art within my collection, including my 45 by 11 feet painting called Voyage of Discovery, a single canvas again. So that is the largest single canvas, I believe, in existence, according to Hussein. But probably Ranjit can elaborate on the sizes and history. I have no clue. So when I looked at that work, it did not give me the happiness for me to gamify it, right? For me, it has to have a mathematical component in the work itself. It did not have it. So then when we went back and forth with the team, we've decided to look at Lightning. And that really, that was like something that I never wanted to do, to be honest with you. Just in my collection, I just never want to use Lightning because for the last 20 years, I've been receiving so many requests from people for me to print a poster, send them the image, send them calendars. I did not want to do none of that. And finally, when I look at the NFT domain and the Lightning 12 panels, I said, this naturally fits into what I am trying to do. Yes, I do not want to use this, but at the same time, it fits so perfectly like a glove. So we started working mathematically to see how we can use this as an NFT, the 12 panels. We started playing around with the different matte and framing finishes. So we were able to come out with 25 mattes and 25 frames with 12 panels, 1 to 12. So we were able to bring a 62 rarities or attributes in creating these NFTs. And the gamification behind it was very natural course of action, where a collector can buy one or multiples of these NFTs. But similar to your playing cards, if you can put the royal flush together with the same color combinations of matte and framing and the sequential cards such as the panelists in this case, then he would have a royal flush. So if he can get to the royal flush, he can send them to us. We will burn those 12, cryptographically speaking, within the Ethereum blockchain. And then we would give him one NFT of a single image, all 12 panels together. So that is the gamification component of this particular NFT. And when I saw all of these attributes coming together, I thought this was very natural to do it. And that is the reason why we kind of come along with this story. And then I've been talking to a lot of my Clubhouse community members and my crypto community members on the pricing. So there's no elasticity in the pricing, by the way. No matter what price you put in, it'll go out into the market. So I wanted to have an inclusiveness in this product. So we said, you know what, we need to have the inclusiveness is a must. And the reason for that is every time I talk to Hussein told me, Kent, all the poor people think I belong to them because I came from a very poor background. All the rich and high society, they think I belong to the rich and high society because my paintings are worth in crores. And guess what? I don't belong to none of them. I belong to people. So I wanted to tell that story from the beginning of how people can get involved at the lowest level or lowest pricing for an NFT and then become a part of an exclusiveness into this whole story. So the pricing and the numbering, everything is kind of going around that story. We haven't announced it yet, but we're very close to those numbers. It's going to be pretty low in terms of the pricing and the way the NFTs will be priced. But anyway, that's where we are at this point. And we are actively talking to multiple communities and multiple members in different parts of the globe. Thank you, Indrajit.
Perfect, thanks. Bridge, just a note, I think after, on Ken's suggestion, we now have to join at least 100 Discord groups and Telegram channels. So I hope you're ready for that. That's our weekend agenda. Ranjit, I'm going to move over to you. As you're aware, we are we're doing an auction of Gobardhan Ash's avatars that the name we kind of...
I mean, I think to start with, Indrajit, sorry to intervene, but I think it might be a little helpful if you can sort of give a little bit of an introduction to Gobardhan Ash's auction that we're...
Right. So we were consigned an estate by of the artist Gobardhan Ash, and the estate is sourced from a village in West Bengal called Begampur. So you take a flight and then you travel an hour and a half, and the artist actually lived most of his life in a mud hut, which makes his contribution, I mean, kind of important, given, you know, the place that he came from. So this was an artist that was active around 1930s to 1960s and possibly 70s. Part of the Calcutta group, before that, part of Indian Student Union, Indian Rebel Artist Group, and various other groups. I mean, he was a leader in his time. He was wanting to do things that were different. And when we saw the collection, and of course, there were a lot of studies done in government. I mean, he was part of Government College of Madras and College of Art in Madras and Government College of Art in Calcutta. I mean, there were those studies there, but we noticed that from 1948 to 1951, there was this very different set of paintings. And I'm going to actually weigh in on Ranjit to kind of put these in context, and then I will come back to why we decided to do an NFT on these. So Ranjit, can I ask you to put, you know, Gobardhan Ash's work in context, given, you know, 1940s dominance of Shantiniketan, Government College of Art, and yet we have something quite different coming about.
Sure. Thanks so much, Indrajit. In the first place, thank you, and thank you, Brijeshwari, for having me as part of this discussion. I also want to say to both Suril and Kent that this has really been a truly interesting and fascinating discussion thus far. As Suril was speaking, I thought to myself, amazing how the deep sources of this idea of a universal spectral currency go all the way back to H.G. Wells, The Shape of Things to Come, a 1933 novel in which he floats the idea of an air dollar, which would be universally applicable and through mechanisms that are not constrained by an overly centralizing authority. And that has in some ways always been a kind of a dream. But I was also struck at what seems to me to be a slight difference in your standpoints. Suril spoke more of a kind of a democratizing impulse to, so to speak, lower barriers of entry to potential collectors and make art available through what you might want to call kind of a commons. And as I understood it, there was some anxiety on his part that what should have been value in use, a currency, was sort of becoming a kind of a value storage. Correct me if I misunderstood you, Suril. But on the other hand, it was interesting how Kent has this model of how collectors might be included at a certain level, and then this entire system continues on its journey towards a certain exclusivity. So I think we're at a very intriguing point where we're somewhere between the usual prestige economy in which art circulates and the possibilities of a more democratic way of including people. But that's just my long ago social sciences training, which continues to inform a lot of how I go about these things. But to come to what you're specifically asking me to speak to, Indrajit, I also want to place this in the context of how very intriguingly you have interpreted your mandate as an auction house. I notice, and we've talked about this before, you have looked at figures who tend to be peripheral or marginal or have been unjustly overlooked. Rabindranath Tagore in an earlier auction, Bhanu Rajapadhyay in a more recent auction. And as someone who's been in part of the art world here and elsewhere since the late 1980s, as a writer, as a curator, as someone who has played various roles in cultural institutions, one of my key problems with the Indian art world is that we have too quickly committed ourselves to a rather limited and, I would say, shallow notion of a canon. Which simply sustains itself by simple reiteration in financial fora that matter, which actually means that a whole range of practices and positions get left out. So this is by way of, believe it or not, it's actually a compliment, Indrajit. so I'm fascinated by the way in which you have, put your energies into restoring to view these positions. And Gobardhan Ash, in my view, is also one of those. I've over the years seen his work in episodic fragmentary flashes, thought about him in some contexts, but it's really what you've done that invites us to look carefully at why he was special and how one might contextualize him and yet recognize the distinctiveness. So briefly, what I want to do is to move our framework a little bit. I want to compare Gobardhan Ash to a literary figure who was almost his exact contemporary, Jibanananda Das, who was a poet and a writer of fiction. And both of these people, as I've been thinking about their lives, Gobardhan Ash was born in 1907, Jibanananda in 1899. They were not young men at partition and independence. They were already, in the middle of their lives. Jibanananda Das had spent 42 years on this planet by the time Tagore died in 1941. Gobardhan Ash was 34 in 1941 when Tagore died. They'd spent their formative years, their early youth, they were already well en route in their career, in a position of having to articulate themselves against this incredibly salient and dominant figure and his contribution. And I think that's something I want to flag in this discussion. How Tagore's presence, and please don't take this as a criticism of Tagore, he was an extraordinary visionary and contributor across fields. But in terms of what this meant for a new generation, be it of painters or of poets, I think there was a very, very strong sense that there was a dominant way of doing things that they had to struggle against. And when I think about what was happening in Calcutta at that point, this is a kind of backstory to those crucial years, 1948 to 51. We have to see how people like Jibanananda and poetry and Gobardhan Ash in the visual arts, were also denizens of a city that had lost ground. You know, from 1935 onwards, the New Delhi is the seat of government and of power. Calcutta is now the ex-capital. It begins to be marginalized in a certain way. And its citizens, its cultural actors are beginning to deal with this question. In the 1940s, the city is heavily mobilized as a kind of base of operations for all the military activities on the Eastern Front of the Second World War, Assam, Burma, and there's a great deal of chaos already. Then the famine, as a result of this wartime operations, the famine kicks in. And then in 1947, there's the immense refugee crisis from East Bengal, which really shakes up the city's infrastructure and sets in motion social transformations that will continue for decades longer. So that's the general background of destabilization, crisis, and so on that I want to bring into this discussion, because it informs the work of Gobardhan Ash, the decisions that he makes in those crucial years, 48 to 51. And because normally we tend to see this in the art world, we tend to see this history as a kind of interplay of styles. You know, we see that there's still the Bengal school with its relative stability of style and imagery. Then we position the Shantiniketan manner over against it. Then we put in the Calcutta school, then there's the Calcutta group, and then there's talk of how the progressives of Bombay had opened up a certain dialogue with artists in Calcutta. Now that's, you know, these would account for certain stylistic shifts, but I think the deeper psychic crises, the cultural questions that these artists are dealing with, that comes a little bit from this history that I've sketched out. So how does one situate Gobardhan Ash's work? I mean, remember that in those years, 1948 to 51, there are many options available to artists in Calcutta. On the one hand, through the famine and the war years, there's the very, very powerful, graphic, politically oriented style of artists like Chitta Prasad, who were part of the left, formerly part of the left formation, and their work spoke for the anguish and suffering of the starving and the vulnerable. There was also, of course, all of the experiments in an indigenously achieved modernism that were coming out of Shantiniketan. Ramkinkar Bej would, when I look at the gouaches of Gobardhan Ash, for instance, I find myself thinking a little bit of what Ramkinkar was doing as a painter in those years. The Calcutta group had positioned itself as a set of artists who would deal with the contemporary and not deal with crises and questions that they felt already belonged to a previous generation. So rather than the civilizational questions that exercised somebody like Tagore, I think the Calcutta group was more concerned with articulating its own historical moment, which already was looking forward to a post-colonial time, the breakdown of empire, and how to really, what is the drama of the individual in these questions? What are the artistic choices to be made? And in those same years, young art students like Jogen Chaudhary and Sunil Das were drawing the refugees, the homeless at Shalda Station, for instance. So I'm saying all this because the tendency sometimes is to pick an artist out of his or her context. And I would like to see Gobardhan Ash also in this larger field of possibilities and practices. But when I look specifically at the work from 48 to 51, I'm very intrigued by the way in which he pulls back from all of this and focuses on creating a style that very definitely has a connection to various idioms within Pattachitra, not in a nostalgic or in a romantic way, but in a fairly robust way to try and bring this Pattachitra imagery, its figuration, into a consciousness that clearly is aware of cinema, that's clearly aware of animation. And I'm struck by this, that you have a form of figuration that really looks back, speaks to the Pattachitra, but also looks forward to, looks into its own time, to cinema, to animation, as I said. And it just makes it very fresh and contemporary, leaps out. It's also an artistic sensibility that is fully engaged with political questions. So communist activists. There's images called Comrade, for instance. They play a role. The Santhal community is certainly very salient and present. The handling is different from the kind of idealization you might see in the Shantiniketan school. But he's also looking back into deep time. He's looking also back to Faxian, for instance, the Chinese pilgrim. There's an awareness of how Calcutta, no longer the capital, greatly beset by political crises, is yet part of an Eastern India that was part of a cosmopolitan, pan-Asian way of being in the world. So when I look at these images, it's amazing how so many of these different histories come into this very, very tight period. And this is my takeaway. I think it's been far too long that the contribution of this painter has remained in abeyance, and it's really high time we bear witness to him, as indeed you're doing. So these are the thoughts that I'm going to share, and I hope we can circle back to some of these things later in this conversation.
Thanks for that. Just to circle back on what point I was making, the reason why we decided to sell one physical artwork and an NFT is that a lot of these artworks were executed in a very, as you say, potchitra or a primitive style. And as you say, look forward to cinema, or they get some sort of an emotion or a personality trait inbuilt into that. And it just so happens 70 years later, in the NFT space, we have this thing called CryptoPunks, which is kind of like, it's all about traits, it's all about portraits with different, either physical or emotional or other traits that were minted and were a huge success. So again, just for the sake of putting art history and putting things in the right context, I said, okay, one physical artwork, and let's give the artist his due. I mean, CryptoPunks happened in 2017-18. I mean, Gobardhan Ash Avatars happened in 1948-51. I think it makes sense that they're also minted as NFTs. So that's how and of course, it was very interesting how we stumbled on it. I mean, these artists, they were artists. They were not, some of these guys are not commercial at all. I mean, this guy used to live in a mud hut in Begumpur. Going there, I mean, is a challenge. The Google Map, even Google Maps till today doesn't work. You have to ask people, oh, where's this football ground, hospital ground, football ground, hospital ground, and finally, you manage and land up in their home. And there you see a treasure trove of artworks. And again, very difficult. I mean, we all collect art, auction house, etc. But 1930s to 1960s is not easy to get artworks from that period. And I was like, wow. Anyway, moving.
Indrajit, sorry, can I just add a kind of a footnote to what you just said? Two quick points. One is, I know we sometimes tend to use this term primitive or primitivist as a kind of a description, but it tends to then develop also a value as if it's back then. Just to say that Pottochitra is a living contemporary art. It was contemporary even at the time Gobardhan Ash was painting. So in a sense, he wasn't really looking at something that was museumized and fossilized. He was also drawing on practitioners in a different social milieu who were very active at the time. So I would see that really as a dialogue between two different forms of contemporary art, except it wasn't recognized.
Right. And the reason I use the word primitive is simply to put into to make an analogy with the CryptoPunks, which
yes,
you would call simple executions. I think it's 26 pixels or something like that, and in that you have an artwork being made. And so, in a sense, very little complexity of texturing, but the essence is out there. That's what I meant. And that
I mean, I know how you meant it. It's just that it comes loaded with a certain kind of value. I'm not saying that you meant it in any pejorative way, but that can happen. Right. So that's just a footnote that
I am very careful not to get into an argument about primitivism with you. So, all right, just following up, Brijeshwari, I mean, do you think NFTs will replace traditional art auctions? I mean, how do you see them in context?
Well, I mean, I think we keep going back and forth this conversation about NFTs being the future, NFTs being the trend. And I think they're just going to be two parallel markets because no traditional fine artist creates NFTs. I mean, the traditional context, obviously. So I think it's just going to be, they're going to be two parallel markets that are just going to keep developing side by side, because NFTs give digital art legitimacy, and traditional art doesn't really come into that picture, does it? So, I mean, I would say that it's something that's going to sort of keep on evolving with time, but I don't think that one is better than the other or one is going to replace the other, because I'm not so sure if a traditional art collector would want to buy an NFT, for example. So
we have an example right here.
Well, not every traditional art collector. So
the only issue is you don't know how unique Kent is as a collector. So
yeah, no, I mean, you don't, it's sort of, and digital art is kind of like encouraging more youngsters or people who are more tech savvy to get into the industry.
That was my assumption, but we got one of the registrations that happened. And of course, before an auction, we have to verify every registration. So I was trying to explain to him that, oh, NFTs will be bought by a younger crowd. He says, Mr. Chatterjee, I'm 74 years old and I'm only interested in the NFTs. So it's difficult to box in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I don't think you can sort of negate one. I think they're just, I don't think it has to be a race or a competition where, it has to be one or the other. I think someone can buy a traditional artwork and buy NFTs, or just be happy with hanging a painting on their wall. Like, I don't think one has to sort of like eliminate the other one.
So we have a question. Will the recording of the webinar be uploaded? Yes, of course. It'll be on our YouTube channel. Going back to Suril, just a very specific question now. In the US, you have a Howey test. Basically a case that decides what is a security, what is a currency. And then based on that, there are further in whether when one is selling a coin or when is selling a token, one has to follow certain rules or regulations or the kind of investors you sell to. Has there been any such thing in India? I mean,
as of now, there hasn't been anything, like, in fact, when we were doing our research, first thing we looked at was, when we were looking at Bitcoins, I'll use the example of Bitcoins rather than just cryptocurrency in general, because that's where it all started for us. So when we were looking at Bitcoins, we looked at the Coinage Act, and we discovered that, Bitcoin is not a coin according to the provisions of the Coinage Act of India. Then we looked at the securities law, and then we saw that Bitcoin is not a traditional, in its traditional form, it's not a security either. Then we felt that, then we said, is it a software? Is Bitcoin just a code, and is that a software? And it kind of fell into that category. But then we were like, it's end of the day, just a digital code. And what are the governing laws for the code? Like, how do you, it's, and we said that if Bitcoins was called Bitpoints instead of Bitcoins, there would, I think the governments would not even have recognized its existence, because we have something called the loyalty points market, which is completely outside the purview of any financial supervisory board. And it's probably the most, like with loyalty points, you can buy a hotel stay, you can buy crockery, you can buy, there's this whole parallel economy of loyalty points. And what we felt was that the way that the Bitcoins were generated was by people being loyal to a certain blockchain. So could this be a possible form of loyalty points? And if Bitcoins was Bitpoints, I think, it would have changed the whole purview. And coming back to the question, is there anything like the Howey test in India? I don't think we have anything of that sort as yet in India. And in fact, some of the news reports even recently said that the government of India was looking at SEBI to come and regulate cryptocurrencies. But these are just, hearsay reports, and there is no conformity. And because of that, it becomes very, but obviously some of the provisions of FEMA, and that's the Foreign Exchange Management Act, and PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act, some of those provisions are applicable to the Bitcoins and the cryptocurrency markets.
Okay, I have a question for Kent. I think probably Kent would be the right person for this. How would you value your NFT, today, let's say? When you spoke about valuation, and there's a question about exactly on that.
So, for us, for the team, we're primarily looking at the community. We're looking at, what the community wants us to do, where the pricing should be for the NFT, and what are the benefits, experiences, or the membership benefits we are going to offer. So they're all like tied in together, right? For example, anyone who will own the Lightning NFT will have access to a conference that we're putting together on the NFT matters in New York. So there are different areas we're going to pick up based on the community. Again, if the community decides they want to have a conference in a geographic location, yes, we will have in the geographic location. So all of these are driven primarily by the people that we are engaged in and having conversations with. So a community is playing a lot of role in how they want to see the experiences behind this NFT and how they want to value it. So we have nothing to do with it other than coming up with a price on what we think we want to achieve in terms of giving it as a price per NFT. And we want to make it very inclusive so that we can provide this at a lower entry level point. At some point, it becomes exclusive. We don't have a choice on that, right? So we all know what happened to Bored Apes. We don't know what happened to other tokens or other coins or other NFTs. We have no control on that. And it could also go down. No one has a control on that. So what we can say is whatever the price is going to be determined by the community and the community surveys that we're conducting and having conversations with, and also having that inclusiveness into the NFT upliftment of the community, and to have those experiences associated especially for the NFT owners only. So we are very specific. The entry will only be for the NFT owner. If you're not an NFT owner, you cannot come to that event. So that's how we are positioning this whole thing.
Perfect. Ranjit, follow up with you. So you do realize that very shortly we're going to be sending you images of artworks like the Bored Ape for criticism and feedback. So I hope you're ready for that, right? So,
why not?
Right. Just a forewarning. So just to back up a bit again on Gobardhan Ash, one of the things that's was kind of curious about the progressive, I mean, you mentioned writer, right? You mentioned Jivananda Das. I mean, there was also a progressive writers group, which apparently had an office in Calcutta as well. Possibly the joint collaboration between the Calcutta group and the progressives at that time happened because of this office that was also there in Calcutta and in Bombay, and the fact that I think Pradosh Dasgupta was part of the Lalit Kala Academy, so he also played like a blue. I mean, do you have any further context on that time period? I mean, just right after independence, we're having a major exhibition show. I mean, of course, you spoke about Gobardhan Ash's art, but I'm just curious to, any more tidbits about the environment at that time, or
honestly, we would really have to retrieve the details of this period. But when I think about the late 40s and early 50s, I think it's a time of tremendous upheaval that's experienced across the arts, and there are alliances across the arts. So the Progressive Writers Association, which of course is extremely salient in the late colonial period during the 30s, then extends its mandate across the new nations that have emerged in the moment of independence. So you have some of the members of the Progressive Writers Association going across to Pakistan. And today, of course, when you say Pakistan, we tend to think of West Pakistan. In those days, they were also just based in Dhaka. So I find it interesting when we think back at this period to see how left-leaning, left-liberal writers were creating or trying to hold up some kind of counterbalance against the kind of really violent nationalistic positions that had emerged after 1947. So you have the progressives in West and East Pakistan and in India still trying to keep up this kind of relatively more utopian, more inclusive way of thinking about what the arts could do in terms of the new possibilities of freedom. And as far as the Bombay progressives were concerned, I mean, we know that Sousa was for a while, styled himself as a communist, but somebody like Sousa really couldn't be constrained by any party ideology. But I think he took the name with him, but he may well have carried some of the contacts. We would have to look in much greater detail. But what you've researched and brought to light, I think these are possibly connections that have been hinted at, but not necessarily, documented.
We were surprised to find that exhibition catalog as well. Again, I mean, I can't explain my glee all the way. Forget about archives in Bombay or Delhi or, the Asia Society or something like that. I mean, I've never seen the exhibition catalog in its full form. And it is, it came out of a mud hut in Begumpur. I mean, it's kind of a little bizarre from that sense. I have a couple of questions, actually. One question is that would you consider, this question I'm not sure if Suril or Kent would answer this. So somebody went to our website and said, would you consider minting on a chain other than the Ethereum because the gas fees itself is higher than the estimates, or at least the current low estimate that you have there. And this, I guess, goes on to what Kent was, what Suril was saying about that the Bitcoin minting fees have also gone so high that it kind of defeating the purpose of an easy exchange. So I'm not sure, Kent or Suril, who would like to answer this question. Like, should we be minting on other blockchains than the Ethereum?
Sure, thank you. Suril, if you want to go ahead. Okay.
We'll wrap up in 10, 15 minutes. I realize this is crossing over. Just a couple more questions. One more question for Ranjit, one question for Bridge, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. So the issue of gas is very high right now on Ethereum chain for various different reasons. Okay, because the miners are not able to get the power, for running their mining capacity, and there's a huge demand for minting these tokens. And as you have more transactions, the higher the gas fee, because there's not enough, miners out there to finish these transactions. The question is, if you have NFTs coming out, should you consider the other chains besides the Ethereum chain purely from a gas perspective? If you ask in that manner, my answer would be, it's almost like comparing to, I want to be art collector. Should I buy a Picasso or should I buy a print of some, artist, right? There's a huge difference where you want to belong and where you want to be. There are different communities. There's a Bitcoin community, there's an Ethereum community, there's a Polygon Matic community, and there's a Solana community. It all depends on where you value your token to be in. If you want to have that 92% market valuations going on today on the OpenSea, which is pretty much controlling factor today in terms of the marketplaces, you want to be on the Ethereum chain. They also support Solana and not Solana, sorry, Matic or Polygon. But the problem with Polygon is you're getting so many airdrops right now. It's getting glut. I mean, I have so many people who airdrop NFTs into my wallets for free. And please, I don't want any more NFTs. I don't want them. Don't give me any more.
You could send them my way. That'll be appreciated.
These are Matic NFTs. So it was also like that, by the way, initially, right? If you go back to 2017 and 18, you would get so many coins airdropped into your wallets. And then you had MetaMask. Consensus was giving out, like in a ticket format, printed wallet addresses for free at every conference you went to in New York City. And each wallet came with 10 free Ethereum or one token depending on who's giving away, you get that many free Ethereum tokens. So everything started in that manner. I'm not saying no, but right now we have the luxury of picking up which chain you want to be in. So some of the younger artists or new artists coming in, they do not want to pay a higher gas fee. So they're trying out, Matic and Solana. I'm not saying anything good or bad about them. It's just the fact that if you want to go in the route, you can go in the route. But also consider the consequence of being in the route. Once you're there, can you be again considered as a serious artist to be on the Ethereum chain? So you need to look at these aspects for yourself as an artist. I mean, if you're an artist today, you're living in the best time in this lifetime period as a digital artist. This is your time. You don't need the gallery. You don't need a curator to tell you if your work good or good or bad. You don't need some gatekeeper to tell you, yes, you're going to make it or not. Dude, go listen. You make the work, you put it out there, you build the community, they're going to buy it. If I like the work, I'm going to buy it, right? So we're living in a different kind of society where the community matters and the community decides if you are a sellable artist or marketable artist or not. So in this scenario, the kind of chain you pick up, the kind of art you want to deploy in, it's your decision how you want to do it. You have that independence. This independence also comes with a responsibility. You need to feel the responsibility to your collectors. Where do you want your work to be in? So you as an artist must decide which chain you want to be in.
I'm going to put Ranjit on the spot here. Where do you think we should mint the Gobardhan Ash's NFTs, on the Ethereum blockchain or others? What would be your suggestion?
I'm just discovering this entire domain, so I have no view to offer. I'm just listening to Suril.
Is it an important enough artist to mint on the Ethereum? I guess that was my question.
But you're clearly committed to Ethereum, so
that seems to be so. In blockchains, I believe there's this what's called decentralization. I mean, and certainly the Bitcoin blockchains and the Ethereums and all that are heavily decentralized, which makes them also very secure. And it just seems to be, as of now, as of today, I mean, I've had this conversation with Kent as well. I mean, as of today, certainly this, I mean, predominantly is the right place to be minting. I mean, notwithstanding the gas fees, which should change in ETH 2.0. Bridge, quick question for you. What's next in NFTs at Princeps?
Well, I think you can probably answer that better than me, but we actually...
Well, you're curating that show, so...
No, so, I mean, as I think we discussed this previously as well, where we had the pleasure of auctioning these artworks of Bhanu Athaiya. And we have been having multiple conversations and talks over Zoom and Instagram Live about the artist and her contribution to, well, art as well as design, and being the first Indian to win an Oscar, and the entire history of her as a costume designer. And I think this was very similar to the entire Bhanu, the Gobardhan Avatar sort of a thing, where part of the Bhanu estate are these very interesting sketches that she created prior to obviously making the costumes that she envisioned. And we decided to sort of come up with this title of the traditional and the new, because if you may have seen our previous conversations, they've all been sort of circling around what Bhanu inherited as textiles, the traditional saris with, real zari borders and the works. And the new obviously being the costumes that she has designed. And when we go to the sketches, what we end up seeing is that these two can be characterized as avatars, from the sari or the costume design to the hairstyle and the silhouette and the makeup, the head, I mean, all of it together. So we thought that it would be interesting to sort of juxtapose the traditional saris of Bhanu with the new, which is the contemporary pieces that she has designed. And the fashion sketches being what we would be sort of creating as NFTs. So if I'm not wrong, I think Manish Malhotra had dropped an entire collection of NFTs based on his sketches. And I think this would obviously be something that is more historic in that sense, because these are sketches that are obviously very, very old.
From the first Indian to win an Oscar. So
yeah, absolutely. So I think that gives it the art historic element that we're always looking for, even when we go into the digital.
Right. So what Bridge is basically saying is that we have, from Bhanu Athaya, we have covered her modern art period, and now we will focus on her costume design period, which is very different in style and execution. I just want to move back to Suril. I mean, I want to understand, we're obviously in the midst of, this is probably the last question, Suril, and then if I may want to have a question, Ranjit, and we're going to wrap up. The predicament of the Indian government, obviously we have a competitor to the fiat currency, which is Bitcoin. Crypto Rating Council 1.0, which means it's purely a currency. Then we have ICOs, local ICOs, obviously like the Polygon or the Mat, which have done very well and held, it is a local. But an ICO for all practical purposes is a security. I mean, so now you have an extremely decentralized blockchain like Ethereum or Bitcoin, which is very hard to control. I mean, you can't beat them, join them. All you can do is make people report what they have. And then on the other hand, you have very speculative like coins, which have also been minted in India. And it seems that the right thing to do is just to, embrace it with open arms and say, hey, you want to, have an exchange with coins and, let them be registered or let them be, welcome in India, as long as, we know what they are and who they are and what they're doing. I mean, what do you suggest, because I'm sure the government is working on some framework or policy now. I mean, what I mean, I know it's a $1 million question. I mean, it's a very difficult, but it's, there's currency and there's coins. I mean, it's how do you regulate? I mean, what do you do? What's your suggestion?
I mean, when I see the whole crypto economy as, which includes NFTs and cryptocurrencies, ICOs, and, there is IDOs, there are DEXs, there are DAOs. It's a completely new realm of it's that whole what everyone's talking about, the Web3, and it's here now, right? And India is in a very unique position where most of these programmers and developers are situated in India or they are of Indian origin. And India has a huge potential to spearhead this if it creates something like a sandbox regime where people can, or entrepreneurs can just go and experiment with their tokens, and where the government says, okay, look, we'll give you, give you this sandbox where you can just play around with your technology. Because at the end of the day, it's technology. And if India wants to position itself as a IT capital of the world, it will have to embrace all of it. If you look at today, Zug in Switzerland has become such a predominant player in the whole crypto economy, because they have just kept it, they have eased up regulations for these new ventures, and which has resulted in, when I went to Switzerland, I was quite amazed that I would find, major banks advertising Bitcoins at the airport. And the way they have embraced it, we are seeing a similar embrace in United States, and India should be looking at these jurisdictions rather than looking at China or something like that, where they're just going and banning it, because India is obviously more geared towards Western democracies than some of these authoritarian regimes. The authoritarian regimes are having more difficulties, but the West is embracing it with open arms. Like you look at places like Estonia, you look at, Eastern Europe, which is embracing it. And, and this is India's opportunity to really, if it embraces it, we are talking about a whole new golden era of IT in India.
I agree. Ranjit, last question for you. So we have a 3+ hour video interview with the Gobardhan Ash's family. Unfortunately, the entire thing is in Bengali. So it is being transcribed right now, but there were a few interesting anecdotes. This goes back to your point early on that art is a continuum. And the reason I say that is because one of the earliest works of Gobardhan Ash we stumbled upon was a 1929 horse, actually. And the connection, I mean, obviously we're speaking about lightning, which is about horses, but we have a horse executed in 1929, which was placed in an exhibition somewhere in Calcutta. And I believe Jamini Roy saw that, and I said I wanted to meet the artist. And so, I mean, Jamini Roy is another artist who was also influenced by Potchitra, as you say. So again, just one of the points that you have stressed time and time again is that art is not is a continuum. And just I'd like to end this interview by just a few more like your thoughts on that again, because I just find that the more we say it, I mean, people need to hear about this.
Fantastic. The reason I emphasize that is because when you tend to look at artworks as, so to speak, products or objects taken out of their context, you really lose a lot of the energy that really brings value to these works. I'm not saying this doesn't apply to present company, but that can be a factor. So when I look at a painting or look at an artist's position like Gobardhan Ash, my curiosity is immediately piqued in these terms. What were the contextual interrelationships? Who were the artists he knew? Who were the poets he read? What was the cultural milieu like of which he was a part? And I think all of this feeds in. And it also, the more closely you look at it, the more you realize that artists have never ever sat quietly in some simple regional or linguistic or national box. They've always been transgressive. And it strikes me that the tonality of our present conversation has in fact been about transgressive possibilities. So I think artists like this are really exemplars for this kind of adventure on which we seem to be embarking. So thank you for reminding us of this, because it's something we tend to lose sight of. I think, having last month spent about a week in Calcutta, I was just very, very happy to see that so many of these energies are still vital and robust, but sometimes they tend to be under the radar. And we need to bring that back. The vital circulations from which all of these artists have come, whether it's Ram Kinkar or Gobardhan Ash or Jogen Chaudhary, whoever you might think of. I think it's important to keep in mind the constant interplay between so-called high culture and so-called folk culture, and to recognize that both of these have been contemporary. As we're speaking, I'm thinking of Kalighat. Kalighat spanned a century from the 1830s to the 1930s. So at the time that Gobardhan Ash was in his 20s, the Kalighat tradition was still alive and well. It's getting to the end, but still vital, still a source of inspiration. So I think this is, and it's great that you have this oral history, this recording, because I'm sure that from it, there will be a lot of clues and traces to this kind of larger life in culture that would have nourished his imagination. So thank you very much.
We're waiting for transcription ourselves. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Suril. Thanks, Ranjit. Thanks, Brij. Just a small note, if you do get any free art drops, please do forward. I'm sure all of us, including Ranjit, Brij, Suril, we'll all be happy with those. Anyway, just jokes aside, thank you very much. And we look forward to a week from now when we have the lightning drop and the first ever auction of NFTs in India at Princeps. And thank you very much. And let's stay in touch, and hopefully one more Zoom call at some point in the future. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much. Good night.
Bye.
Right.